The flames curled around my grandfather's will, my father's hand steady as he burned the document that left his estate to me, reducing it to ash. I am Rowan Greavves, the outcast they buried long ago, standing in a room thick with the stench of lies. But in my pocket an envelope trembles with a secret, a ledger, a legacy, a truth they would tear down an entire dynasty to conceal. They think I'll fall. Let them think it. I've survived worse than their flames, and I'll burn their empire to the ground with the truth they fear most. Don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The story still holds many untold secrets. Stay tuned. The chandelier's golden glow fractured into 1,000 prisms, casting a deceptive warmth over the conference room at Greavves and Halford, where power smelled like lemon polish and betrayal wore a tailored suit. Rowan Greavves stepped through the door, her boots silent on the polished wood, her navy jacket unadorned, save for a single pin, a faded bronze star from a deployment no one in this room had ever acknowledged. The air was thick with the weight of a family that had long ago declared her irrelevant, their eyes sliding past her like she was a ghost, summoned by mistake. Leonard Greavves, her father, sat at the head of the table, his CEO posture unbroken as if this will reading were a board meeting he could adjourn with a wave. Ara, her sister, perched with crossed legs, her smirk as sharp as the pen she twirled a victor in a game Rowan had never agreed to play. Miss Halford, the lawyer, offered a nod, her face a mask of professionalism honed over decades of navigating this family's thorns. No one spoke her name. No one asked about the scars she carried or the wars she had survived. Rowan was here for one reason, a promise to her grandfather Marshall, whose absence now filled the room like a storm waiting to break. Psychologically, the archetype of the erased heir is a crucible of identity, forged in the tension between external dismissal and internal resolve. Rowan's presence, uncelebrated and barely tolerated, was a mirror to a family that thrived on curated narratives, where Ara's rise as the golden child required Rowan's erasure as the outcast. Leonard's glare, cold and unyielding, was not just disapproval, but a deliberate act of unseeing, a refusal to acknowledge the daughter who had chosen service over submission. Ara's smirk, polished to perfection, was a weapon wielded to reinforce the hierarchy where she reigned, and Rowan vanished. This dynamic, rooted in sibling rivalry and patriarchal control, thrives on the psychology of comparison, where one's worth is measured not by their own merits, but by their ability to eclipse another. Rowan's silence as she took her seat at the table's edge was not defeat, but defiance, a choice to hold her truth close, knowing it was too vast for this room's narrow script. Have you ever stood in a space where your name was a whisper, your existence a footnote in someone else's story? The ache of being unseen by those who should know you best is a wound that cuts deeper than any blade, yet it also forges a resilience that no applause can match. Rowan's hands rested in her lap, her fingers brushing the edge of an envelope tucked inside her jacket, a secret Marshall had entrusted her with, sealed with red wax, and a warning, "Don't open this, unless they try to burn it." The memory of his voice steady over lukewarm coffee at Hillcross Diner anchored her, now a reminder that her grandfather had seen her when no one else did. The archetype of the mentor, wise and unyielding, lives in such moments, offering not just guidance, but a mirror to reflect the strength the world denies. Miss Halford's voice cut through the silence, calm and measured, reading Marshall's will with the precision of a surgeon. To Ara, the evergreen lake property, and the antique Steinway, a bequest that drew a flicker of surprise across her sister's face as if she had expected the empire itself. To Leonard, first edition Hemingway novels and a $10,000 donation to the American Ethics Council, a gift that prompted a snort of derision from the man who valued power over principle. Then to Rowan Greavves, my granddaughter, my only confidant, the remainder of the estate, financial holdings, real estate and voting control over Braden Tech Systems. The words landed like a grenade, the room's air tightening as Leonard's jaw clenched and Ara's smile cracked. Miss Halford slid a check across the table. $38,246,000, clean signed, dated. Before Rowan could touch it, Leonard lunged, snatching it with a fury that seemed to ignite the air. "You think this brings you back?" he spat, pulling a lighter from his pocket. The flame caught the paper, curling Marshall's signature into ash as Ara gasped, and Miss Halford leaned back unfazed, as if she had seen fortunes burn before. The archetype of the patriarch, desperate to control the narrative, thrives on such acts of destruction, believing that erasing proof erases truth. Leonard's fire was not just spite, but a ritual, a way to burn Rowan's legitimacy to cinders, to keep her on the margins where he had cast her years ago. Ara's gasp, performative and sharp, was less shock than strategy, a signal that she too would fight to maintain the script where Rowan was the failure, the deserter, the nobody. Yet Rowan's smile, faint and unshaken, was not surrender, but certainty. Psychologically, such moments reveal the power of the overlooked, whose silence is not weakness, but a shield. Forged in battles both literal and familial, where survival demanded invisibility. Her fingers brushed the envelope in her pocket, Marshall's warning echoing. "They'll try to erase you." They had, and she was ready. As Leonard flicked the ashes across the table, accusing Miss Halford of forgery, Ira demanded a second reading, her voice rising with the cadence of someone used to winning. Rowan sat still, her eyes tracing the room's edges, the polished wood, the lemon-scented air, the family that had declared her dead long before any court did. The archetype of the unsung hero finds strength in such moments, not in retaliation, but in resolve, in the quiet knowledge that truth outlasts fire. Leonard's words, "That's what you get for walking out," were meant to wound, but they glanced off Rowan's calm, her smile a blade of its own. She had seen this ending, had lived it in the silences of Kandahar, in the rubble of a tent where she buried a journal to survive. The envelope in her pocket was not just paper, but proof, a legacy Marshall had built to withstand this very fire. The room's chaos swelled, Leonard's accusations clashing with Ara's demands, but Rowan rose, her boots steady on the wood. She walked out, no slam, no drama, just the sound of her presence reclaiming itself. Outside the courthouse lot was as she remembered, cracked asphalt, a leaning oak she'd climbed as a child. Before Leonard declared girls didn't belong in trees. The drive to her apartment was quiet, the envelope burning a hole in the passenger seat. She didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she stood in her kitchen, a glass of water in hand, staring at a street that wasn't home, but was hers. The weight of the will, the fire, the family, it settled like dust. Familiar yet heavy, a reminder of another silence years ago, when she returned from Syria, to a house that had erased her room, her name, her existence. Marshall's wire transfers had kept her afloat, his letters tucked in books and drawers, his trust a lifeline no one else had offered. Now, as the envelope waited, Rowan felt the stirrings of a truth too big for their flames, a legacy she would not let them burn. Rowan's apartment was a study in spareness. Bare walls, a single chair by a window overlooking a street that hummed with lives she didn't know. The envelope sat on her kitchen counter, its red wax seal unbroken, a silent challenge under the fluorescent light. She hadn't opened it last night, though her fingers had traced its edges until dawn, as if touch alone could decode Marshall's final message. His warning, "Don't open this unless they try to burn it," echoed in her mind, a directive, now fulfilled by Leonard's lighter and Ara's complicity. The check was ash, but the envelope was her grandfather's last move in a game he'd played longer than anyone knew. She sipped black coffee, the bitterness grounding her, and considered the weight of what lay ahead, a family that would rather destroy her than share, and a legacy she hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. Psychologically, the archetype of the keeper of secrets carries a dual burden, protection and isolation. Rowan's choice to delay opening the envelope wasn't fear but strategy. A soldier's instinct to assess the battlefield before acting. Marshall had taught her that not in words, but in actions, late-night chess games at Hillcross Diner, where he'd let her win only when she earned it. He'd seen her not as the family's outcast, but as a mind capable of carrying what they couldn't. The envelope, she sensed, wasn't just a document, but a map, one that would lead her through the Greavves' labyrinth of lies to a truth they'd kill to bury. Her phone buzzed, a text from Miss Halford. They're contesting the will. "Meet me at 10 a.m. my office." Rowan's jaw tightened. Leonard's fire was just the opening salvo. The lawyer's office was a contrast to Greavves and Halford's opulence, modest, cluttered with files, a single fern wilting in the corner. Miss Halford sat behind a desk stacked with papers, her eyes sharp despite the fatigue lines etched around them. They filed a claim of undue influence, she said, sliding a document across. Leonard says Marshall was senile. Ara says you coerced him. They want the estate reverted to Leonard's control. Rowan's laugh was low, humorless. Senile. He was sharper than all of us at 92. Miss Halford nodded, her lips twitching. I know. But they've got money and motive, and the courts love a family feud. She handed Rowan a USB drive. Marshall left this for you, said its context. Don't plug it in anywhere public. The archetype of the betrayed heir thrives in such moments where trust is a currency rarer than gold. Rowan pocketed the USB, her mind already mapping the next steps. Leonard's accusation of senility was a tactic, not a belief, a way to rewrite Marshall's clarity into fragility, to erase his choice as easily as they'd erased her. Ara's claim of coercion was sharper, a blade aimed at Rowan's character, painting her as a predator, to maintain the narrative of Ara as victim and victor. Psychologically, this is projection at its finest, the family's guilt for their own manipulations displaced onto the one they'd cast out. Rowan's silence as she left the office was not retreat, but resolve, a promise to herself to honor Marshall's trust. Back at her apartment, she plugged the USB into a laptop she'd never connected to Wi-Fi, a habit from years of dodging surveillance in war zones. The drive held a single video file, time-stamped a month before Marshall's death. His face filled the screen, weathered but unbowed, his voice steady as he spoke directly to her. Rowan, if you're watching this, they've already tried to burn you out. The envelope's your shield, but this is your sword. Braden Tech's voting shares aren't just money, they're control. Leonard wants them to sell the company to a defense contractor with blood on their books. Ara's in on it, thinks she'll get a corner office. They don't know what I've hidden in the estate's accounts, what you'll find if you follow the trail. Trust Miss Halford, but no one else. And don't let them see you flinch. The video cut to black, leaving Rowan staring at her reflection in the screen, her scars a map of battles fought and won. The archetype of the mentor, even in death, offers not just guidance, but a call to action. Marshall's words were a blueprint confirming what Rowan had suspected: the estate wasn't just wealth, but a weapon, one her family would destroy to keep from her hands. Braden Tech Systems. A sprawling tech conglomerate wasn't just a family asset, it was a geopolitical chessboard. Its contracts tied to drone warfare, surveillance, and deals Marshall had spent his life trying to steer toward ethics over profit. Leonard's fire, Ara's accusations. They were moves to bury that influence, to sell out for a payout that would erase Marshall's legacy and Rowan's place in it. She opened the envelope, breaking the wax seal with a knife. Inside, a single sheet of paper listed account numbers, passwords, and a note in Marshall's handwriting: find the shadow ledger. It's the only proof. The weight of the task settled on her shoulders, heavy but familiar, like the rucksack she'd carried through deserts. The shadow ledger, likely a hidden record of Braden Tech's dealings, would be buried deep, accessible only through systems Leonard controlled. Rowan's military training kicked in, assess, plan, execute. She'd need access to Braden Tech's servers, but walking into their headquarters would be suicide. Leonard had loyalists everywhere. Miss Halford was her only ally, but even that trust felt fragile, a thread stretched thin by years of betrayal. The archetype of the lone warrior thrives in such isolation, where every step is a gamble, every ally a potential traitor. Rowan's fingers hovered over her phone, then typed a message to Miss Halford: I'm in. Tell me how to get to the servers. The reply came fast. Midnight, Braden Tech's old R&D lab. Back entrance code 4729. Bring the USB. Rowan leaned back, the coffee cold in her mug. The street outside buzzed, oblivious to the war she was about to wage. She thought of Kandahar, of nights spent guarding secrets in the dark, of the journal she'd buried to keep it from enemy hands. This was no different, another mission, another truth to protect. The envelope's paper lay beside her, Marshall's handwriting, a lifeline across the years. She didn't know what the shadow ledger held, but she knew one thing: Leonard and Ara would burn the world to stop her from finding it. And she'd walk through their fire to make sure they failed. The night was a bruise, heavy and purple, as Rowan approached the old R&D lab of Braden Tech Systems. The building loomed like a forgotten relic, its concrete facade cracked by years of neglect, a stark contrast to the gleaming headquarters downtown where Leonard held court. She parked her nondescript sedan a block away, habit dictating she avoid cameras, her boots crunching softly on gravel as she moved through the shadows. The USB and envelope were tucked inside her jacket close to the bronze star pin that felt heavier tonight, a reminder of battles fought and truths buried. The back entrance was unmarked, a rusted door half hidden by overgrown ivy. She punched in the code 4729, and the lock clicked open with a grudging groan as if it resented her intrusion. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old circuitry, a ghost of innovation long abandoned. Psychologically, the archetype of the infiltrator thrives in such liminal spaces where every step is a negotiation with risk and every shadow a potential betrayer. Rowan's training years of navigating hostile territories where a single misstep meant death kept her pulse steady as she moved through the lab's corridors. Her flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing abandoned workstations, scattered papers, and monitors coated in dust. The servers Miss Halford had said were in a sub-basement, a relic of Braden Tech's early days, when Marshall built the company's foundation on code and conviction. Rowan's mission was clear: find the shadow ledger, a digital record Marshall had hidden to expose truth Leonard and Ara wanted erased. But clarity didn't erase the weight of isolation, the knowledge that she was alone in a war her family had started. The sub-basement door was locked, a biometric scanner blinking red beside it. Rowan cursed under her breath. Miss Halford hadn't mentioned this. She pulled out the USB, hoping Marshall had left a workaround. The drive's single video file had no obvious clues, but she replayed it in her mind. Follow the trail. She examined the envelope's contents again, the list of account numbers and passwords. One entry stood out, a 6-digit code labeled R&D override. She typed it into the scanner's manual override panel, her breath catching as the light turned green. The door hissed open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The archetype of the seeker, driven by a mentor's faith, finds power in such moments where trust in the unseen outweighs the fear of the unknown. The server room was a crypt of humming machines, their LEDs casting a cold blue glow. Rowan plugged the USB into a terminal, its screen flickering to life. The interface was old, clunky, a relic of Marshall's era, but it recognized the drive immediately. A folder appeared, Shadow Ledger, encrypted. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, entering the passwords from the envelope. The system accepted them, and files began to decrypt: financial records, contract details, emails. The Shadow Ledger wasn't just a ledger, it was a dossier, a meticulous record of Braden Tech's dealings with a defense contractor, Cerberus Dynamics. Payments funneled through shell companies, contracts for drone tech linked to civilian casualties, and emails from Leonard approving it all with Ara's name CC'd on every thread. Marshall had built a case, a weapon to stop his son from selling the company's soul. The archetype of the truth-bearer carries a burden heavier than gold, knowledge that demands action even at the cost of everything. Rowan's heart pounded as she read the scope of Leonard's betrayal sinking in. He wasn't just erasing her, he was erasing Marshall's life's work, trading ethics for profit in a deal that would flood conflict zones with unchecked tech. A noise, a faint scuff of boots, snapped her focus. She yanked the USB free, the screen going dark as she crouched behind a server rack. The archetype of the survivor honed in. War took over, silence, assess, act. The footsteps grew closer, deliberate, not the casual stride of a security guard. A flashlight beam swept the room, and a voice, low, male, unfamiliar, muttered, "She's here somewhere." Rowan's hand went to the knife strapped to her ankle, a reflex from years of instinct. The intruder wasn't alone. A second set of footsteps echoed from the stairwell. They were Leonard's men, she was sure, hired muscle to stop her from leaving with the ledger. The first man passed her hiding spot, his silhouette bulky in tactical gear. She moved silent and swift, slipping behind him to lock his arm and press the knife to his throat. "Who sent you?" she whispered, her voice a blade of its own. He tensed but didn't answer his radio, crackling with a voice she recognized: Ara's. "Find her. End this." The betrayal cut deeper than expected, a sister's voice ordering her erasure. Rowan knocked the man out with a precise strike, his body slumping silently. The second man was closer now, his flashlight pinning her shadow to the wall. She dove behind another rack, her mind racing. The USB was her proof, the shadow ledger her leverage, but only if she escaped. The archetype of the hunted, cornered yet defiant thrives in such moments where survival is a chess game played in seconds. She grabbed a loose cable, rigging it to spark when plugged in, a distraction from her day's diffusing traps in the field. The spark flared, drawing the second man's attention, and she sprinted for the stairs, her boots silent on the concrete. A shot rang out, grazing the wall beside her, but she didn't stop. The back entrance was her goal, the night her Alash. Outside, the air was sharp, the oak tree's silhouette a reminder of childhood battles she'd already won. She reached her car, the USB and envelope secure, but her phone buzzed. "Miss Halford, they know you were there. Get to my safe house, 47 Pine Street, now." Rowan's grip tightened on the wheel. The safe house was a gamble, but so was everything else. The shadow ledger's secrets burned in her mind, a map of corruption she couldn't unsee. Leonard and Ara had underestimated her, as they always had, but Marshall hadn't. His voice echoed, "Don't let them see you flinch." She wouldn't. The war was just beginning, and she'd fight it on her terms, with truth as her weapon and scars as her armor. The safe house at 47 Pine Street was a nondescript townhouse, its faded brick blending into a row of identical buildings under a sodium streetlight's sickly glow. Rowan parked 2 streets over, her sedan tucked behind a dumpster to avoid notice. The USB and envelope were still secure in her jacket, the weight of the shadow ledger's secrets pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. She moved quickly, her boots silent on the cracked sidewalk, her eyes scanning for tales, habits etched from years of evading threats in places far more hostile than this quiet suburb. The door's keypad accepted the code Miss Halford had texted, 8291, and opened to a dimly lit foyer, the air stale with the scent of old wood and coffee. Inside, Miss Halford waited, her silhouette sharp against a single lamp, a laptop open on the table beside her. "You got it?" she asked, her voice low, urgent. Rowan nodded, sliding the USB across the table. "It's all there. Cerberus Dynamics, shell companies, drone contracts, Leonard and Ara signed off on everything." Miss Halford's eyes flicked to the drive, her fingers hesitating before plugging it in. The archetype of the ally teetering on the edge of trust lives in such moments where loyalty is a gamble and every gesture carries the risk of betrayal. Rowan's hand rested near her knife, not out of distrust, but instinct. Her military training a lens that saw every ally as a potential pivot point. Miss Halford's screen lit up with the decrypted files, her face tightening as she scrolled through the dossier. "This is worse than Marshall thought," she muttered. "These contracts aren't just unethical, they're illegal. War crimes if the right eyes see it." Psychologically, the archetype of the whistleblower emerges when truth becomes a weapon too heavy to carry alone. Rowan felt the weight of it now, the shadow ledger's revelations, not just a family betrayal, but a global one, implicating Braden Tech in a web of profiteering that cost lives. She thought of Syria, of dust-choked villages where drones had left scars not unlike her own. "What's the next move?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside. Miss Halford leaned back, her eyes meeting Rowan's. "We leak it, selectively. Journalists, regulators, people Leonard can't buy. But we need to move fast. They know you accessed the servers, and they'll be hunting you." Rowan's jaw tightened, Ara's voice from the radio echoing, "End this." Her sister's betrayal was a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding. The safe house wasn't safe for long. A faint creak from the back door snapped Rowan's focus, her hand on the knife, before her mind fully registered the sound. Miss Halford froze, her eyes darting to the hallway. "You expecting company?" Rowan whispered, already moving toward the shadows. The lawyer shook her head, her hand slipping under the table, a gun. Rowan noted her respect for Miss Halford ticking up. The archetype of the hunted, always one step ahead of the trap, guided Rowan's steps as she flanked the hallway, her back pressed against the wall. A figure emerged, clad in black, moving with the precision of a professional. Not one of Leonard's clumsy mercenaries, this was someone trained dangerous. Rowan waited, her breath shallow, until the figure passed, then struck, disarming them with a swift twist and pinning them to the floor. The intruder's face was obscured by a mask, but their build was lean female. "Who are you?" Rowan hissed, her knife at their throat. The mask came off, revealing a face Rowan didn't know but felt she should, a woman mid-30s with eyes that held no fear, only calculation. "I'm not with them," she said, her voice calm despite the blade. "Marshall sent me." "Check the envelope again." Rowan hesitated, her instincts screaming trap, but she nodded to Miss Halford, who retrieved the envelope from Rowan's jacket. Tucked inside beneath the list of passwords was a folded note Rowan had missed in her rush. "If you're cornered, trust Elise. She's my last card." Miss Halford read it aloud, her voice steady but wary. Rowan eased the knife back, letting the woman Elise rise. "Talk." Rowan said, her tone flat, unyielding. Elise rubbed her wrist, her gaze never leaving Rowan's. "Marshall hired me 2 years ago. Off-the-books security to watch Leonard's moves. He knew the Cerberus deal was coming and didn't trust anyone in the family but you. I've been tailing you since the will reading, making sure you got this far." The archetype of the shadow guardian, invisible yet ever-present, fits such figures, loyal to a cause, not a person. Their motives obscured until the moment of truth. Rowan's mind raced, piecing together Marshall's foresight, his chessboard stretching beyond the grave. "Why show up now?" she asked. Elise's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Because Leonard's not just contesting the will anymore. He's hired cleaners. You're a loose end, and they're coming tonight." The weight of the shadow ledger of Marshall's trust pressed harder now, a legacy that demanded not just survival, but action. Rowan glanced at Miss Halford, who was copying the USB's files to an encrypted drive. "We need to get this to someone who can use it," Rowan said. Elise nodded. "I've got a contact at the DOJ off-grid clean. But we need to move now, Leonard's people are close." The safehouse's walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with the promise of violence. Rowan's scars itched, a reminder of battles she'd walked away from. The archetype of the warrior forged in fire thrives in such moments where the line between life and death is a choice to keep moving. She grabbed the USB, the envelope, and her resolve. "Let's go," she said, her voice a blade cutting through the fear. Outside, the night was alive with threats, distant headlights, the hum of a drone overhead. Elise led the way to a black SUV, its plates obscured, while Miss Halford followed, her gun still in hand. Rowan slid into the back, her mind mapping the next steps. Get the ledger to Elise's contact. Expose Leonard and Ara, protect Marshall's legacy. But Ara's voice lingered. End this. And Rowan knew her sister wouldn't stop until one of them was Ash. The SUV peeled out the safe house, fading into the dark, but the war was far from over. Marshall's final move was in play, and Rowan was its edge sharpened by years of being unseen, ready to cut through the lies. The SUV sliced through the night, its headlights carving a narrow path along rain-slicked roads. Elise drove with a precision that matched her demeanor. Calm, controlled, every turn calculated. Rowan sat in the back, the USB and envelope clutched in her fist, her eyes scanning the side mirrors for any sign of pursuit. Miss Halford, in the passenger seat, worked on her laptop, uploading the Shadow Ledger's files to a secure cloud server, her fingers steady despite the tension. The drone's hum had faded, but the threat lingered, a shadow that felt alive, hunting. Rowan's mind churned, replaying Ara's voice. End to this, and the cold certainty in Elise's warning about Leonard's cleaners. The archetype of the fugitive, driven by truth but chased by power, thrives in motion, where every mile is a defiance of the inevitable. "We're meeting my DOJ contact at a dead drop," Elise said, her voice cutting through the hum of the engine. "Old warehouse edge of the city. No names, no traces. She'll take the ledger and run it up the chain." Rowan nodded, her gaze flicking to Miss Halford, who didn't look up from her screen. "Files are uploaded," the lawyer said, closing the laptop. "Encrypted off-grid. Even if they catch us, the truth's out there now." The words were meant to reassure, but they landed like stones. Rowan knew truth alone wasn't enough. Leonard's influence stretched into boardrooms and backrooms alike, and Ara's ambition would burn through any obstacle. The shadow ledger was a weapon, but only if it reached hands that could wield it. The warehouse district was a maze of rusted steel and broken windows, the kind of place where secrets went to die. Elise pulled into an alley, killing the engine. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant drip of water from a leaking pipe. "Stay sharp," Elise said, handing Rowan a burner phone. "If we get separated, call the number programmed in. It's a clean line to my contact." Rowan pocketed the phone, her knife still a reassuring weight at her ankle. The archetype of the strategist, always planning for the worst, guided her. Now she memorized the alley's exits, the shadows where an ambush could hide. Miss Halford tucked her gun into her coat, her face unreadable but resolute. Together they moved toward the warehouse, their steps silent on the cracked pavement. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and decay. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows across crates and abandoned machinery. The DOJ contact, a woman in a dark hoodie, her face half hidden, waited by a stack of pallets, her posture tense but professional. "You have it?" she asked, her voice low, no nonsense. Rowan handed over the USB, the transfer feeling like a surrender and a victory at once. The woman plugged it into a secure device, her eyes scanning the files as they loaded. "This is enough to bury them," she said, her tone clipped. "Cerberus Dynamics. Braden Tech DOJ's been sniffing around for years. This ties it all together." She pocketed the drive, her gaze meeting Rowan's. "You're a ghost after this. Disappear or they'll make you." The archetype of the truth-bearer, once the truth is released, becomes a target, their purpose fulfilled, but their safety forfeit. Rowan felt the weight of that now. The knowledge that exposing Leonard and Ara might cost her everything, her name, her freedom, her life. But before she could respond, a low hum broke the silence. A drone closer now, its whine cutting through the warehouse's walls. Elise's hand went to her sidearm, her eyes narrowing. "They found us," she said, her voice flat but urgent. Headlights flashed outside, tires crunching on gravel. The DOJ contact bolted for a side exit, the USB secure, but Rowan knew the mission wasn't over. Leonard's cleaners were here, and they weren't after the ledger, they were after her. Gunfire erupted, shattering the bulb overhead and plunging the warehouse into darkness. Rowan dropped to the floor, her training kicking and move cover survive. Elise and Miss Halford scattered, the lawyer's gun barking in response as Elise called out, "Back exit." "Now!" Rowan crawled through the dark, her hands finding the edge of a crate as bullets tore through the air. The archetype of the warrior, forged in chaos, thrives in such moments where instinct outpaces fear. She reached the back exit, Elise at her side, but Miss Halford was pinned behind a stack of barrels, returning fire with a precision that belied her age. "Go!" Miss Halford shouted, her voice steady. "I'll hold them." Rowan hesitated, loyalty clashing with strategy, but Elise yanked her through the door. Outside, the night was a battlefield. Two black SUVs blocked the alley, their doors open, figures in tactical gear fanning out. Rowan and Elise sprinted for cover, ducking behind a rusted dumpster as bullets sparked against metal. "We can't outrun them," Elise said, checking her clip. "We fight or we're done." Rowan's mind flashed to Kandahar, to nights when survival was a choice made in split seconds. She pulled the burner phone, dialing the programmed number. "Your contact better be ready," she said, her voice ablade. The DOJ woman's voice crackled through. "I'm clear. Ledger's safe. Get out now." Rowan hung up, her decision made. The truth was out, but she wasn't done fighting. Elise tossed her a spare pistol, and together they moved, flanking the cleaners with the precision of a unit honed by necessity. Rowan's shots were deliberate, disabling rather than killing. She wasn't. Leonard wasn't Ara. She fought for truth, not vengeance. Two cleaners went down, the others retreating under Elise's cover fire. But as they reached the SUV, a new figure emerged from the shadows, Ara, her face pale but resolute, a gun in her hand. "You should have stayed gone," she said, her voice trembling with something that wasn't just anger, regret maybe, or fear. Rowan froze, the pistol heavy in her grip. The archetype of the betrayed sibling facing the mirror of their shared blood lives in such confrontations where love and hate blur into a single wound. "Ara," Rowan said, her voice low, steady. "You don't have to do this." But her sister's eyes were hard, the ambition that had always driven her now a chain she couldn't break. "You think you're the hero," Ara spat. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." The gun shook in her hand, but before she could fire, Elise lunged, disarming her with a brutal efficiency. Ara hit the ground, her scream cut short as Elise bound her wrists. Rowan stood over her sister, the weight of their shared past heavier than the ledger's secrets. "This ends when the truth comes out," she said, turning away. The SUV roared to life, Elise at the wheel, and they sped into the night, leaving Ara in the dust. The city's lights blurred past, but Rowan's mind was clear. The ledger was with the DOJ, the truth no longer hers to carry alone. Miss Halford's fate gnawed at her. Had she escaped, or paid the price for their mission, Elise's contact would ensure the files reached the right hands. But Leonard's reach was long, and Ara's betrayal was a wound that wouldn't heal. The archetype of the survivor, scarred but unbroken, carries forward not for glory, but for purpose. Rowan clutched the envelope, Marshall's note about Elise, a reminder of his trust. The war wasn't over, but she'd made her move. The truth was free, and she'd fight to see it burn Leonard's empire to ash. The SUV hurtled through the city's underbelly, weaving past flickering streetlights and abandoned lots, the hum of its engine a low growl against the night. Elise's hands were steady on the wheel, her eyes scanning the road with the focus of someone who'd run from shadows before. Rowan sat in the back, the envelope and burner phone her only anchors, the weight of Ara's words. "You're nothing" still burning in her chest. The city blurred into streaks of neon and concrete, but her mind was sharp, mapping the next steps: disappear, regroup, survive. The shadow ledger was with the DOJ, but Leonard's reach was a noose tightening around her. Miss Halford's fate was a splinter in her thoughts. Had she made it out of the warehouse, or was her sacrifice the price of their escape? The archetype of the survivor, carrying the ghosts of those left behind, thrives in such uncertainty, where every choice is a balance between duty and loss. Elise broke the silence. "We're not clear yet. Leonard's got eyes everywhere, cameras, informants, maybe even cops. We ditched the SUV at the next safe point and split up." Rowan nodded, her fingers tracing the envelope's edge. Marshall's note about Elise had been her lifeline, but trust was still a gamble, and the lawyer's absence gnawed at her instincts. "What about Miss Halford?" Rowan asked, her voice low but firm. Elise's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, her expression unreadable. "She's tough. If she's alive, she'll find us. If not..." She let the sentence hang, a soldier's pragmatism that Rowan understood too well. The archetype of the ally, loyal yet guarded lives in such silences where survival demands detachment. The safe point was a derelict auto shop, its windows boarded, its lot littered with rusted chassis. Elise pulled in, killing the lights. 5 minutes, she said, stepping out to scan the perimeter. Rowan slipped the envelope into her jacket, the burner phone still heavy in her pocket. She stepped into the cool night air, her boots crunching on gravel, her senses tuned to every sound: a distant siren, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of another drone. The warehouse ambush had been too close. Yara's presence, a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding. Rowan's military training kicked in, assess the terrain. Anticipate the enemy. Leonard wouldn't stop, and Ara's desperation had turned her into something sharper, more dangerous. The archetype of the betrayed sibling, once a mirror, now a blade, cuts deepest when blood ties twist into enmity. Inside the shop, Elise tossed Rowan a backpack. Burner phones, fake IDs, cash a new knife. "You're Jane Carter now," Elise said, handing her a passport. "Head north, cross the border. My contact's got a safe house in Montreal. Lay low until the DOJ moves." Rowan flipped through the passport, her new name a mask she'd worn before in war zones where identities were as disposable as ammunition. "And you?" she asked. Elise's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "I've got my own exit. Marshall paid me to get you this far, not to hold your hand." The words were blunt, but Rowan caught the flicker of respect in her eyes, a recognition of shared scars. The archetype of the shadow guardian, fading into the dark once their role is done, leaves no trace but the weight of their absence. A burner phone buzzed in the backpack, a single message from an unknown number: "Ledger's live." DOJ's moving. Stay gone. Rowan's pulse quickened. The truth was out, but the war was far from won. Leonard's influence could still choke the investigation, and Ara's ambition would fuel her pursuit. Rowan's thoughts drifted to Syria, to nights spent guarding secrets in the dust, to the journal she'd buried to protect a truth no one else would carry. This was no different, except the enemy was her own blood. She slipped the phone into her pocket, her resolve hardening. The archetype of the warrior forged in fire doesn't fight for victory, but for the next step, the next breath. Elise was at the door when headlights flashed across the lot, too close, too fast. "Move!" she hissed, drawing her pistol. Rowan dove behind a rusted engine block, her own gun in hand, as two cars screeched to a stop. Figures spilled out more of Leonard's cleaners, their movements sharp, professional. But one figure stood apart, his silhouette broad, familiar. Leonard himself, his tailored coat, a stark contrast to the tactical gear around him. "Rowan," he bellowed, his voice carrying the weight of a patriarch who believed he could still command her. "You can't run forever. Give me the envelope, and this ends." The lie was as clear as the moonlight. Leonard didn't negotiate. He erased. The archetype of the patriarch, cornered by his own ambition, resorts to force when control slips away. Rowan's jaw tightened, her grip on the gun steady. She glanced at Elise, who nodded, their plan unspoken but clear: divide and survive. Elise fired first, a warning shot that scattered the cleaners, giving Rowan a window to slip through the shop's back exit. The envelope was her shield. Its contents: Marshall's final note, the passwords, a map to truths Leonard couldn't burn. She sprinted across the lot, her boots silent, her path weaving through shadows toward a chain-link fence. Gunfire cracked behind her, Elise's cover fire buying her time. But Leonard's voice followed, colder now. "You're just like him, Rowan. A ghost who thinks they matter." The words stung, but they didn't stop her. She scaled the fence, dropping into an alley as the drone's hum returned closer, its red eye blinking in the sky. The archetype of the hunted, always one step ahead, thrives in such moments where survival is a defiance of fate. Rowan's burner phone buzzed again. A new message: Halford's alive. Extraction point 0400 Pier 17. Relief flooded her, sharp and fleeting. Miss Halford had survived, but the pier was miles away, and Leonard's cleaners were closing in. Rowan tucked the phone away, her mind racing. Montreal was her goal, but first she had to reach the pier, reunite with Miss Halford, and ensure the ledger's truth didn't die in the dark. The alley led to a maze of back streets, each turn a gamble between escape and ambush. Rowan moved like a shadow, her training a second skin, her scars a reminder of battles won. Leonard's empire was cracking the ledger's secrets, a fire he couldn't extinguish. Ara's betrayal, though, was a wound she carried like a blade in her ribs, sharp, personal, unhealed. The archetype of the truth-bearer, now a fugitive, carries not just proof, but purpose, a resolve to see the fight through. Rowan checked her watch, 3 hours to the extraction point. She'd make it, or she'd die trying, but she wouldn't let Marshall's legacy or her own burn to ash.